Welcome to another episode of Obstacle Talk. My name is Linda Honey, and I am with Protected at Work. Today, I have the honor of meeting and talking with Nina French, who is with Hound Labs. So Nina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Linda.
Yes, and please, I've known you, I'm not even sure how many years now, and know who you are and about your background, but I really feel before we get into the questions and the conversation, like, will you tell people your title now, your background, and just kind of how you came to be where you are today?
Sure. I am the president of Employer Solutions and Law Enforcement at Hound Labs. I've been in the industry for a little over 32 years now, and really started foundationally in the TPA provider environment. And after about 22 years of doing that, I moved into consulting for providers, employers, and product manufacturers and developers in the industry, specific to drugs of abuse, and really specifically for workplace and criminal justice applications. And I've just been doing a whole lot of work in that field my whole career.
Your whole career. How did you get to Hound Labs?
Well, interestingly enough, in that consultancy, I got a phone call one day from one of our co-founders. Our founders are Mike and Jenny Lynn. And Mike called me and he explained his background as a physician and a deputy sheriff, working with a lot of accidents, incidents, and roadside issues in California. And he told me that he was setting out to launch a product to solve for recent use in cannabis testing, and specifically for the development of a cannabis breathalyzer. And I really did have a very poignant moment in my life, because I sat there and I thought, if this guy actually is going to do this, this is going to revolutionize things. And so I worked with Hound for about 2 years, consulting with them. And then after that time, he asked me to come on and help lead this product into the market. And so I did that about 3.5 years ago, and I've been with them ever since.
Super exciting. And prior to even knowing about Hound Labs, Nicole and I used to say, gosh, whoever invents that breathalyzer to do what Hound Labs is doing, like, brilliant. I wish my mind worked like that. And here you are.
I am.
Yes, I love that. Well, so I have some questions to sort of explore the issues that are happening for employers. So I guess I really want to defer to you. Like, what do you see? Like, what effects is our employers having to deal with now with all this cannabis legislation that's hitting and that continues to spread across the country?
Well, a lot, right? So it's interesting because, and maybe it is because this is the world I live in, but you really can't even turn on your local news and not hear about cannabis legalization, right? Medicinal, recreational, where it is, how it's going to be rolled out. What they really didn't talk about a lot was, how will it affect employers who use it all the time, right? How do they affect testing for employers? And so the effects have been extraordinary. They're concerned about legalizations coming about, but you and I have been in this industry a long time. They didn't really, when these legislatures were looking, and this goes back to 1996, when California first legalized medicinal marijuana. Really, the workplace drug testing angle of this hasn't taken the forefront of many discussions. And so what we've found is that employers are now saying, all right, well, this legislation's moved through, but they didn't really consult with the industry to say, well, how is the technology? What are we going to do to continue to support workplace drug testing that's been so effective when the laws are changing, but has technology changed with it? And so we now, over 20 years into legalization, are hearing people say, like, all right, we were watching this, but we weren't realizing the impact. We've got hiring events where we had a customer where they said, we've got 70 people who showed up for a job fair. And then when we told them they'd be tested for THC, most of them just didn't even show up the next day. And then the ones who did failed the drug test. So they literally lost 100% of their candidates that day. So they are struggling to balance how do we keep employees when we know they can legally use in our states. And then now they're seeing the statistical evidence that is saying, well, this concern is really valid. So, the National Safety Council is starting to publish cannabis survey data. And they're saying, that of the employers who were in this challenge of how do we deal with this, 53% of them who stopped testing for cannabis are now seeing increased safety incidents, and they're seeing like a decline in performance. There's like 43% or 42 or 43% of employees who are in safety sensitive positions who see people using cannabis at work. And it's not, a theoretical impact. It is a very, very concrete impact. If there's one death at work, it's about $1.3 million in cost. Plus someone is dead. There's a loss of a life, right? If there's one motor vehicle crash, it's about $85,000. A slip and fall is like $48,000. So these are very real costs to employers. And yet these laws are sort of forcing them to look for a way to curb this. And that way hasn't come until really now. And again, we're 2 decades into this. And so there is a little bit of now this really rush to rebridle, put the horse back behind the gate. And that's really what they're struggling with right now.
Well, and yes, which we'll get to in a moment, or I'd like to, about how we've traditionally done workplace drug testing. But I want to back up just a step, because from what you just shared, it's perhaps not just safety sensitive employees that we need to worry about testing. Like, what positions should we be looking at this point with the widespread use of marijuana and the legalization of that use?
Well, so we've been around for a long time in this. And I think this is both from just sort of the general population and legislatures and really just the sort of standard speak. But unfortunately, that standard speak is influencing these laws. People believe that drug testing in the workplace is about safety sensitive positions, right? We're seeing in certain laws safety sensitive carve outs, right? The problem is this: workplace drug testing should not just be about safety sensitive positions. And people mistakenly believe that safety sensitive is very broad. It's very narrow. They do not touch most of the positions that many of us think of, right? Those last mile people who are delivering things to your house, they're not safety sensitive. They're not CDL drivers, right? In many cases, no cybersecurity professionals, the people who have all of your personal identifying information, they're not, right? Rideshare drivers, they're not safety sensitive, but they're driving all over the country. Brand security, cybersecurity, data security, those are not included. And many of the jobs that we think like physical security, many of them we believe are considered safety sensitive are not. Really, the definition of safety sensitive is narrowly focused on sort of the industrial era, where it is, manufacturing, those types of jobs where there's physical safety. But it really needs to look across companies at all aspects of safety. And safety goes to, brand security and things like, how are we going to make sure that our brand is secure, right? How are we going to make sure that our finances are secure? How are we going to make sure that when someone hands over their credit card, that is secure? The data breaches cost companies hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet those people aren't considered safety sensitive. So it really is not a singular focus of safety sensitivity. It really is, how can employers design programs that test all employees across the organization who affect safety in both that traditional sense and then the non-traditional sense that really is where we are in 2023.
I couldn't agree more. And I feel like you're spot on with that safety sensitive or those safety position carve outs. I know in Nevada, we specifically have that about the pre-employment testing and such, right? But
Right.
to your point that people aren't somehow drug testing, workplace drug testing seems to have switched from the deterrence and become this, we're doing it either to get you or safety, right? I mean, can you speak to that?
Right.
Like why do we anchor our programs on all of that? All of that?
Well, you're spot on, right? So again, it is sort of, if I could reverse the clock, I really wish that that our industry had become very strong in advocating for the benefits of workplace drug testing way back in '96, right? I think the prediction of cannabis really toppling what was a very effective risk mitigation strategy. We weren't strong in advocating for that, and we didn't work as effectively as we should have with employers to protect that right, because the cost falls to them. And so we see laws and we see policies starting to revolve around safety sensitive and then talking about impairment. Workplace drug testing, we'll talk a little bit more about impairment if you want to, but really, to answer the question, workplace drug testing started in the 80s because of a fatal crash involving a train, right? But the programs in mandated workplace drug testing all centered around deterring use, right? We were trying to discourage an action or an event before it happened. And we know it worked. And I don't know the stats perfectly off the top of my head, but Quest Diagnostics has published the drug testing index for, I think they started in like 86. And we saw in the beginning of workplace drug testing, positivity rates of like 13.6%. And then the lowest rates were at about 3.1%. And that's the overall workplace, right? Testing, and for all drugs, not just cannabis, but we saw lows of like 3.1% in like 2021, 22, 23, I'm sorry, 2012, 2013, 2014. It held steady right around that time frame. When we were in the middle of an opioid epidemic and many states had already passed cannabis legalization laws. So what does that tell us? It tells us that deterrence works, because what we knew was the country was in the throes of this epidemic and people had more access and were allowed to use products containing THC in them. But yet we saw a low because it works. It works to deter. It means if I'm going to use, I'm either not going to apply for that position or I'm not going to use while I'm at work. But either way, you're protecting employers' safety and the public against the use. And that's really what it is. It is a preventative measure. It is a deterrence measure. And that's what we have to remember when we're looking at sort of shifting and refocusing and introducing new technology into the workplace testing industry and into workplace testing for employers.
How then did we, in my opinion, shift off course and suddenly become about impairment? Where does that come from?
I won't opine necessarily about how I think it happened, but again, I think it is once the problem was recognized, legislature sort of said like, how do we do the right thing, right? How do we try and now contain this problem that was an offshoot of legalization, but we didn't really necessarily recognize it. So now we're seeing laws that are talking about impairment. So Linda, you've been in workplace drug testing for a long time. What is the impairment level for opioids?
I
There
don't
isn't,
know.
right? What is what is the impairment level for amphetamines? We test for that all the time. What is it?
Right. And what is it if
Right?
I do it and you do it? There isn't.
Right. Workplace drug testing is about deterrence. It's not about impairment. And yet now, as a way to contain the problem, we're seeing laws that are focused on impairment. And that actually limits the value of workplace drug testing. Even when you think about alcohol, right? A little bit different. Everybody
Right.
says, oh, we know what impairment is. We don't actually know what impairment is. What we know is that we have a breath alcohol test that indicates recent use of alcohol. And then we have millions and millions of data points that say, okay, so we know how much alcohol is in this person's system. And then let's test their cognitive impairment, the impact to how they are functioning. Now let's marry those two, all of these millions of data points and this ability to measure recent use of alcohol. Let's marry them together and we'll create a per se legal limit. And that is an impairment standard. But what you said was really important, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm impaired. It is a legal limit that we've decided works. We're still refining that 120 years later. If I have one leg in Utah and I have one leg in Colorado and I take a breath alcohol test and I blow a 0.05,
Yep.
in Utah, I'm impaired. In Colorado, I'm okay.
That's
right?
exactly right.
And so we've got to really refocus laws and drug testing on workplace drug testing programs and technology that reduces risk, that prevents use, but doesn't penalize people, right? It's why do you, if you run to the grocery store, why do you put on a seatbelt?
So I don't
Right?
die.
You don't put the seatbelt on after the crash happened. You
Right.
put the seatbelt on before. Think about all the things we do to prevent, right? Why do you, if you take 10,000 steps a day and you measure it on your little watch,
Right here.
are you not going to have a heart attack? Nah, not necessarily, but it is the right behavior to prevent issues and problems. And that's really what workplace drug testing is about. It isn't about measuring impairment. It is about preventative behaviors that can protect employees and employers and really protect the public as cannabis legalization continues to grow.
Totally makes sense. And I couldn't agree with you more. I do. We have, both of us, you even longer than me, have been in this industry, and just the shift has been like, whoa, wait, like who said, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Suddenly we're saying all of these employers are impairment experts when people with a lot of experience in this industry aren't impairment experts, right?
Right. And we focus on impairment. We don't even focus on impairment with the application of alcohol, right? If you look at the DOT, who everybody considers as the most stringent, the DOT removes people from safety sensitive positions way lower than a 0.08, right? You take action at a 0.02, at a 0.04, at a 0.06. Again, because they do not want that person to cause an incident or an accident. We never looked for impairment or proof of it in workplace drug testing. We rely on testing and testing methodologies to prevent the problem.
Well, and so let's go there. So your Hound Labs, talk about how, like, the value of the cannabis breath testing that your company's developed.
We both said in the beginning of this, right, that this has been something that we have been looking for. The workplace drug testing, had we not looked at this issue, had we not thought about cannabis, which is really legalized in a very different way, right? Very different than any other drug. the technologies and the methodologies for testing that exist today, oral fluid and urine and hair, and there's others that we don't generally use in workplace, right? There's blood, we don't use it, it's more invasive. There's sweat that's used more in criminal justice. We don't use that. But those testing methodologies all are very good in many ways. Some of the testing methodologies, like hair, are to look at a lifestyle, right? So they can't detect recent use of any drugs. It takes a while for the drug to come in their hairs after about a week, right? Others, like oral fluid and urine, are good at detecting recent use, but their window of detection is very long, right? So urine can be weeks. It can be in some extreme cases months, right? Oral fluid is days. So when you take that and you look at legalization, if I am a 21 years or older and I'm in a state that allows adult use, I need to figure out what can just show very recent use, right? Use that occurred during that work day, and that's all I need to see, right? I don't want to look at an employee's use that happened over the weekend if they were legally allowed to use in my state. I want to narrow that to continue to get the value of workplace drug testing, to curb those costs, right, to prevent those accidents. Right. But I don't want to eliminate those candidates, and I don't want to terminate those employees who use legally outside of work.
Right.
And that's really what we tried to do at Hound Labs. And we did that through the development of a breath test specifically for cannabis. Okay. It's the only ways for an employer to really have a fair, objective prevention of workplace cannabis use just during the day. And that is what using breath and breath technology does for employers and for workers, right? It keeps it fair. I want to be able to use at home. I'm not going to use at work. And I'm okay with you testing me, but don't look at what I did on Saturday night. Look what I did that could be affecting me today at work.
With the breath test that you've developed, is there a specific window of detection that you can see, or that you've been able with your various studies to be able to show that's still within somebody's system?
When you're looking at breath, you are really just looking at a number of hours. Okay. So very recent use. So use that happened immediately before or while you are at work. We are not looking beyond the 4 to 6 hour window. And as we continue to get more and more test data, we will be able to say really, what exactly that window is of workplace drug testing. But remember, all testing methodologies have a window, and depending on the person and when they're tested, that will vary. But what we do know is that ours is a matter of around 4 hours. So again, it really is used right during that work day that we're measuring with breath.
Which is huge. I know we hear stories, I'm sure you hear stories from employers, and it sounds as if your technology is even going to address the ones that say, I used the night before to help me sleep, or to, right? Like the person that had the beer at night, right?
Exactly. You are exactly correct. We don't want to look back at what they did if they used at night because they're, trying to get a better night's sleep. We're not looking at that. We want to know, is that use during that work day? And then is it violating my policy that says you may not use during the workday? And this is the only technology that can do that.
So I'm sure, staying on that you're hearing from employers the issues, whatever language you want to use with this, about the concerns they're having with the other tests that they're utilizing right now. Even if it's oral, which has, to the best of my knowledge, the shortest window currently prior to your product, the shortest window of detection, right? So
right, but you're still looking back. You're exactly right. We're still looking back 24, 48, 72 hours. Unfortunately, a weekend is only about that long, right? And that's a whole other conversation.
That's exactly what I thought. Sorry.
Yeah, whole other conversation. How can we get that one a little bit longer? But it really is, right? You want it to be that work day. And that's what we're hearing from employers. We're hearing it in a couple different ways. So it's been a learning experience. As long as I've been doing this, I find it interesting that I still learn everything new, and being here at Hound has been just a fantastic experience and a learning experience. We're learning something new from these employers. So we've got some of them who are saying, I'm trying to hire people. It's like record difficulty in hiring bodies to get to work, right? You go to restaurants, your favorite restaurant, and they're closed because they're like, we are having staffing issues. So they want to hire, but they don't want to lose the ability to test for what is the most used drug outside of alcohol, right? And so, and now in legal states, it's the most available drug. So they want to test for them, but then if they test for them using oral fluid or urine, then they're excluding the vast majority, in some cases, of candidates. Then on the flip side, we've got employers who have good employees. They test them randomly using those same methodologies, or they see an incident or accident and they have a zero tolerance policy, and then they have to terminate that employee. And the employee is saying, I used Friday night and I'm legally allowed to. So it creates a really bad situation for employers where they're concerned about, are they going to be sued because they used a testing methodology that looked back too far? And so now they're terminating someone who they could legally have used on Friday and they tested on Monday, right? They don't want to lose the new hires, but they also don't want to lose the ability to contain that cost and stem the negative impact of workplace drug use, especially when drug use is on the rise because cannabis is legal. So it really is that rock and a hard place. And we're hearing those stories. We're also hearing from traditionally organizations who aren't necessarily in love with workplace drug testing, right? So some of the unions who've traditionally resisted drug testing. Well, when they're talking to us, and they're talking about the Hound breathalyzer, they're like, this is what we need, because we also want the workplace to be safe, right? Mm-hmm. We also want to protect our union population, but we do not want to lose those people who are using responsibly. And this is really the solution we've been looking for. We're okay with saying don't use while you're at work. Right. We're not okay at using technology that looks back into their private lives and their adult use that's legal.
It totally makes sense. And Nina, Nicole and I owned a drug testing company before we started doing this protected at work and such, or just finally branched out and did more than owning the drug testing company. But one of the things that we started to see slowly, and I imagine that it continues, that we're hearing about 4-panel drug tests where we see people just pulling it off altogether. What do you say to that?
Well, the statistics don't lie is what I say to that. So I'll go back to that drug testing index that Quest performs. And we are seeing record positivity rate, right? So we're seeing record workplace drug testing positivity. And I don't know who is going to listen to this, but what positivity rate means is you've tested positive at the lab. And that's generally what employers are looking for, right? How many people are testing positive? Because that's where they're going to take some employment action, or they're going to choose not to hire that person. We are seeing record positivity rate across every drug in general when you look at that data. And again, I don't have it in front of me. I don't have it memorized, but you're seeing record. You're also seeing year over year from 2021 to 2022, you saw 10% increase or more. It was slightly higher, I believe, in testing for THC. 10%. But yet we're not seeing the full story just because of what you just said, right? Yet we are also seeing employers who are saying, oh my gosh, I need these bodies in the seats. So I'm going to take what is ultimately a reactionary measure, drop THC from my panel, even though I know use is up, I know availability is up, I know it's the most used drug. I always liken it to the fact, my poor kids hate that I do this, right? But I have 4 teenage girls. It is like me looking in their room and saying, oh, I see a bong, oh, I see a bottle of vodka, and there's 3 boys. I'm going to close the door and say, my kids have nothing going on in there, right? Dropping THC from your panel is closing the door and hoping that all of the costs and negative impacts just don't happen. It's like a fool's journey, right? It's a fool's journey. They will turn around, and those numbers that we saw of the $100,000 or $1.4 million for a death in the workplace, they're going to creep up on them.
Right.
Because the use is going to happen. Closing the bedroom door is not the right choice. And that's what drug testing, dropping that THC from your panel is doing. And so that's where I think we as employers, right, we in our industry have to be advocating, have to be working, and have to be educating these people who are making the laws and developing the technology to say, we do want to test our employees. We want to test them to deter use, not just when they walk in the door, not just in the first 60 days of employment, but through the continuum of employment. We want to be able to test all of our employees to prevent these issues, to stem these costs, to protect us, to protect our bottom line, to protect our brand, to protect, our fiscal responsibility to our stockholders, to protect the data of the people who are our customers. We want to test everybody fairly across the board, reasonably. And now that we have technology that limits it to workplace, it really can help to solve that. We just have to start to educate. We have to remind employers what it's about. We have to remind employers how significant it is when they're looking at their risk mitigation strategy. And we have to really educate legislatures and the general population of these costs are real. This impact is real. We are not out to get people. We're not the bad guys, right? We are just opening the door, recognizing the risk, and putting in place preventative measures. It's not about impairment. It's not about what happened after the fact.
Yeah. And you used a word while you were just right at the end there that I think people miss, and that is that we're testing fairly, right? That we're testing fairly. I know that for us, I have 2 that really stand out, because the other thing I hear feels like politically, what I hear is, oh, in 30 days, it takes 30 days to clean marijuana out of your system. And you and I both know that's not true anymore. And the longest cases we had was a gentleman that tested positive for over 3 months and a woman that tested positive on urine drug testing for over 4.5 months, where we watched both of their levels go down. Were they high? No, months ago, right? But your product, Hound Labs breathalyzer, would have shifted that whole experience for both of those individuals. Right. And the other cost we see is losing that good employee that we don't think has been smoking on the job or eating an edible or whatever, right? Right.
And then we are then paying to replace. And those costs go from like 21% for sort of a baseline employee. Some higher paying positions are 200% and 300% of their annual salary to replace them. And then you spend 6 months training them to try and maybe get as good as this tenured employee who you lost
Right.
because you were looking back too long and it had nothing to do with their effect or the effect of the drug use during that workday.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what makes it fair.
That is what makes it fair. What about policy? What about policy surrounding using a breathalyzer for marijuana?
Well, I'm a self-admitted policy nerd, and I love to talk about policy, so I won't really get up on that soapbox, but I will say this. You need to look at the laws in your individual state. You need to work with an employment lawyer. You also need to remember that a policy in the workplace is like a living, breathing thing, right? It is something that you don't just create and then throw in a drawer. Everyone listening needs to pull out their workplace drug testing policy and look at it. You need to create language that states that use is not allowed during the workplace or during the workday, immediately before or during, right? That is some of the things that when you're talking to that legal counsel, you want to express to them. You don't want to talk about impairment. Workplace drug testing is not about impairment. If you start to introduce impairment for cannabis, then what are you going to do when the person says, did you prove I was impaired for my legally prescribed oxycodone? Did you prove that I was impaired for my amphetamine that I take because I have ADHD, right? It's not what it's about. So you want to say for cannabis that we want to prevent use during the workplace. We are willing to use a technology that shows it. As an employer, if you were to continue even to test using an existing methodology, but you had the Hound Labs drug test, imagine how powerful that is, right? Imagine how powerful it is to say, I took a drug test on Linda, and Linda tested positive using oral fluid or using urine. Then I took the added measure of using THC. And this is how I protected my employees. I saw maybe that she had that positive, but I saw she had a negative on the Hound Labs breathalyzer. And so I know the use did not occur during the workday.
Right.
And so I'm going to allow that employee to stay through my policy, right? If you just focus on that recent use, it allows use out of work, and then it prevents it during the workday. And that's really where you need to shift the focus in your policy. Not about impairment, not about signs of use. And we do see technologies that are coming to market that are about identification of impairment. And we didn't talk today about law enforcement. Those are going to be tools, right, that can augment that testing. So if you have a breathalyzer, but you have another subjective measure that shows cognitive signs of impairment, those two, the marriage of those two are fantastic, right? Marriage of those two are fabulous. If you have a case of reasonable suspicion or an incident or accident in the workplace, right? Using a Hound Labs breathalyzer shows that the use was not in the past, but it was during the workday, and that use may have contributed to that incident or accident. If you then want to use additional technology that talks about impairment, that's a different conversation. It's no different than what we've always had. I found it interesting that New Jersey introduced this concept of the WIRE, the Workplace Impairment Recognition Expert. We've had DER training in this industry before I entered it, right? And what was that? It was write down the signs and symptoms that you are concerned about, document it, hopefully have a second person who can say, yep, I agree. We're seeing that behavior. And then do a reasonable suspicion drug test. That's always existed. That's not new. That's 1% of testing. And the incident, the accident, the cost, and the loss of life has already occurred. We do not want to limit employers to that because it's going to cost them a fortune. We want to provide for them technology and help them design policies that support preventative measures, right? And they spend a lot of money on prevention. We are saying this is a part of your investment in prevention that you see across the board in your workplace, from using robust passwords on your computer and multi-factor authentications, and the fact that I log in and I've got to go to my phone and type another code to make sure it's really me, right? That's about prevention.
Right.
Putting your seatbelts on, prevention, right? Wearing your step meter is about prevention. Workplace drug testing is about prevention. And that's what we have to refocus policies, legal, technology, and legalization towards.
Right. Back to the point that we started it with, deterrence, right? Deterrence for use in the workplace. Right.
That's the benefit. That's the fair benefit.
And not to pick on California, because I don't know who's going to listen to this either, but California's law, to my understanding, that's coming in January, I believe, of 2024.
AB 2188.
Is that right? Yes. Can you speak to that a little bit? I know that your facility is in California.
Yeah, it is. I feel like it is a step in the right direction. So without getting technical, I'm not a scientist, nor am I a lawyer. So I'm talking about these in a general sense. Nobody should be taking this away and saying this is some lawyer or doctor. I'm none of those things, right? But what they tried to do is the recognition that testing for metabolites is where we get that old use, right? So that's where technology picks up that past use. And so in the laws, they did limit and state that they need to test for, employers need to use technology that tests for the parent drug. Unfortunately, when you're talking about oral fluid, you still have a very wide window, right? So in a state like California, you're still looking back for that 24, 48 hours. Okay. And so I believe that the law did not go far enough, and we need to continue to refine that to limiting to workday use. So if they want to call us, they can call, and we're happy to talk to them about it. But and again, not restricting use to impairment. We don't want to see language about impairment. And that's great for roadside. That's great for law enforcement. It's not great for all law enforcement, right? You and I know criminal justice work is different, right? If you're in a criminal justice setting and you're going to pick up your child, and as part of that agreement, you would need to take a breathalyzer to show that you're not using. That's great, right? If you can show through a breathalyzer that you did not use cannabis or a product containing THC prior to picking up your child as part of a custody agreement, that's great, right? So there are other applications. There are roadside applications where impairment will become more important as we marry, right? Again, like cognitive behaviors and a detection of recent use through breath. That's great. In workplace, these laws, and like the one we're seeing in California, we'd love to see that great first step of not looking for metabolites. That's a great first step. We'd like to see an expansion beyond safety sensitive for all the reasons we discussed earlier.
Right.
We'd like to see testing through the continuum of employment, right? If I use that same example and I say to my kids, all right, you're teenagers now, I'm going to go in and make sure everything's good. And then I close the door and I wait till they're walking out the door to move to college. And I say, well, I tested when they walked in the door. I saw there was nothing in there. I'm assuming everything's perfect, right? We want to be able to test, and it's not punitive. It's preventative. And so I think that AB 2188 was a step in the right direction. I think as we've seen now this new technology that we're bringing to market continue to narrow the focus, I think that's important. And again, this is about cannabis. Oral fluid and urine still have a fantastic place in workplace drug testing. We just need a new technology right now for cannabis. And so the refinement of these laws that are starting to recognize the limitations in law and technology is great, but I'd love to see those continue to evolve to allow to remove that exclusion from just safety sensitive, to allow testing throughout the continuum of employment, and then to allow employers to embrace the new technology that just limits workday and immediately before workday use. And so again, I think it's a step in the right direction. I'd love to see these continue to evolve and progress to meet what we've created through legalization.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I appreciate that you said there is a place for oral fluid drug testing. There is a place for urine drug screening and testing. But I think what Hound Labs has been able to do in getting that recent workplace during my day testing result is huge. I think there's another part that Hound Labs has done that, for me, as a consumer or an employer, or whichever way we want to look at this, as part of this industry, is your partnership with Quest. Do you want to address that at all on this?
Yeah, I mean, our product that is coming to market is a laboratory-based test, and then we'll follow up with a test that will provide some screening results in the field. But Quest is really one of the most respected laboratories in the country. Everybody knows them. That drug testing index, every year that it comes out, is sort of a hailstorm of information for employers, for the HR community, for the safety communities. Our partnership with them, we believe, allows a really rapid adoption of the technology and a marriage of this technology with the existing. And the other thing is that we've really developed it and then partnered with them to make it easy for employers, right, to have a chain of custody, to ensure that it's a forensically defensible product as you roll it out, and to sort of check those boxes, right? So we have a screening test, we have a confirmatory test, we use existing technology, LCMS. We've used that for years. It really is a gold standard of testing. And so our partnership with Quest allows us to take advantage of their history, their reputation, and their processes and procedures that are already in place for lots of employers, and then to get our technology embedded in that. And from our perspective at Hound, it really is sort of the best in class for employers to be able to pick up and use quickly.
Yeah, when we read that, we were like, holy smokes. I mean, we're already fans of, like, yay, somebody did this, somebody's that smart. But to partner with Quest, that was kudos to you and your company. That's a really big deal.
Thank you. Yeah, we were thrilled to have that.
Oh gosh, yes. You mentioned, and I don't want to put pressure, and as I said, I've been at your facility. Is there a timeline? Is there a window of where we're looking to hopefully get that instant? Because we're not a very patient society, and we want to know right now. I want my popcorn in 60 seconds. I want to know if my employees used marijuana during the workday or not. Is there a timeline on that for you guys right now?
We are looking to launch that in 2024.
Nice.
And again, both products, it's interesting because I think some people think, well, this is sort of the starter, and then this next one will come out and replace it. Not the case, right? So there will be applications for both. There are some states, unfortunately, that restrict use of point of care devices.
Yes.
And so we are really, we've gone into this very purposefully, and trust me, we would have loved to been in the market 5 years ago. It's complex. It is extraordinary technology. We have more patents than I can remember how to count. How you develop it, how you develop it into the existing infrastructure through integrations with partners like Quest and through third-party administrators to provide that, right, to have that chain of custody. All of those things are important. And then in certain cases, we will know that people, because they're doing a urine test or an oral fluid test, are going to want to go to collection centers, collection sites, patient service centers, and do those tests. And they're going to say, well, for whatever reason, we're waiting for a physical, or we're waiting for a background check. And so we want to do those things, or there's different protocols. And so it makes sense for us to continue to use that process and procedures, go to those clinics. Others are going to say, well, we want both, right? We want both. We want to be able to test employees as they come into the job, and not everyone, right? You don't have to test every employee every day. It's about deterrence, right? It's about deterrence. You don't test everybody every day. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I'd love it, right? I'm Hound Labs. I'd love you to test everyone every day, every minute. It's not going to happen, right? It's not the purpose. It's not the purpose. Drug testing is not punitive. It is that deterrence. And so some people are going to say, we want to have a system that can give us a result or a screening result on site. And so we can test our people as they come through and get that result. Some people are going to use our collect and send model for that. So we'll see both. We know there'll be application long-term for both. We know there'll be certain states that are a little bit tougher for introducing that screening test. But again, happy to talk to anybody to help them understand why that's important. And like you said, it's more important now than when these original drug tests, many of those restrictions predate me in this industry, and they seem to not change. We would love to work with our industry to continue to refine those laws, because you're right. Patience is not a virtue that we have very much anymore, and so we do need to look at being able to adopt some of those more rapid responses across the board, not just for cannabis, in some of those states that restrict it.
Agreed. And so first, I appreciate your time more than I can say. Nina, how would someone get a hold? Like, what number should they be calling? Where should they be emailing? Of course, anybody that's interested in Hound Labs breathalyzer certainly can contact either myself or Nicole through Protected at Work. But Nina, is there certain numbers or emails they should be looking at for your product to meet directly?
Absolutely. But what I would say is, for either of our products, the best place to go is right to our website. So houndlabs.com. There's a button on the top of that page that you'll land on that says connect with sales. The reason I think that is the best place to go is it outlines for people who've heard this and who are interested in what our product is, what the solution is, information about the industry, information about our technology, information about our company, and then it allows you to connect with sales, and they'll get right back to you. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on all of those different social media sites. We have an extraordinary marketing team who provides not just information about us, but about the industry, about insight into these changing laws, about insights into the different limitations, and really try to bring it down to a level where everybody can understand that. And Hound and our founders have really invested heavily in making sure that we remain active. That's why I get to do stuff like this that I love so much. Active in this industry, to push the industry forward, to support employers and employees in a fair technology. So I think really that is the best place to learn more about all of those different things, and follow us. And it would really get you'll get a quick response, but it really is a great source of information to watch all of these issues and how they're moving forward, and then to purchase the equipment or to get on the waiting list to get the equipment. The sooner the better. The demand is pretty extraordinary. Again, would have loved to have done this 5 years ago, but we've got a lot of people who are looking to get that. So the sooner people can get on that list and do a pre-order or order, we can try and get you some base station and cartridges quickly once you get on there.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. You guys are shipping. Like, this product has hit the market. You're
in the market.
Yeah,
it is in the market. And it was great to have you come visit our facility. It's a pretty extraordinary manufacturing site, and just to watch the technology, again, I'm not a scientist, but just to watch how it has all come together has been a pretty once in a lifetime experience. And I'm a total nerd in the industry. I find this fascinating. I'm really interested to watch how we adopt this technology, and to watch how the influence of people like you sort of educating employers and safety professionals. I think it's really important. I'm really looking forward to watching how this happens over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and Protected at Work is excited to be a part and a partner with Hound Labs. We completely believe in your product. Seeing your facility was amazing, but I'll tell you, despite, and I'm not a scientist either, or a lawyer, but despite how amazing the product and the facility and the process of doing all of that was, your people. Like, you've got great people in your company flowing. Please.
We do. I mean, I joined and right about the same time, Sammy Dabbs, who leads our sales, she joined. She's an industry professional, and she's been around for about 13 years, and she is really better than anybody I've seen. We then worked to expand into the industry, and really I gotta say, this is one of the things I'm most proud of. Bringing in from the the workplace drug testing industry, really some of the very best people. And then again, it's always sort of that. It's funny because we say we're balancing safety and fairness, and we're also balancing a million other things at Hound. And one of them is this industry insight that is, I still learn stuff after 32 years every week. It is a very specific industry, how we do things and what we need to do. So taking the ability to bring on this team who has all of this industry knowledge in workplace drug testing, and then our R&D team, who, I mean, they talk about science and technology, and I'm just, they have degrees in things I didn't even know were things you could have degrees in. To watch our manufacturing come up with these professionals who have brought to market from incubator to commercial and then beyond. It really is, I think, Mike and Jenny and our executive team and myself, we are really proud of the team we brought together. And so I appreciate you recognizing it, because it really is a great team. And we enjoy working together.
It shows. So Nina French, Hound Labs, again, those of you watching our podcast know that Linda's doing her best to get links on the bottom. So we hope to have that available for you at the conclusion of this. And Nina, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us today.
Thank you.